Welcome to our Chai Chat on children's literature. We're calling it Hooked on Books. We're very glad to have you here, whether you're a parent, a teacher, or a current writer, a future writer, or just playing with the idea or want to understand why books are important. That's what we're here to talk about. So thank you for joining us. We do have examples on the table. Some of you got to look at it before. And once the Chai Chat is over, you can also take a look and see just some examples of what there is available, what the possibilities are. Can we to the next? I'm sorry. So I think the first question that I always like to ask before we start discussing a topic is, why are we talking about this topic? Why is it important? Is it important? And if so, why? So why do we read to our kids? It's actually recommended to start reading to your babies at, say, 4 months old, to start reading to babies, which may seem like, what does a baby care about a story? It's that the baby doesn't understand, right? But the benefits of reading to our babies, as well as older as they grow, is number one, it's language. They're hearing the language, right? Repetition of words. That's how we acquire a language. Another thing is information. We do use books to teach things, right? For instance, this book is about numbers, okay? So they're gathering information at the same time. And it actually, another part of that information that they're gathering is, as you read a book, that they're seeing, babies can't understand words, right? So what they're noticing is they're noticing the tone of your voice. They're noticing the expression on your face, right? So they're soaking up this emotional information about, they don't understand what's going on in the book yet, but they can tell what your reaction to it is. Okay, and so that's part of their education and growth and development as well. It also helps with thinking skills too, apparently. So emotions, and then the other two things that we're not really going to talk so much about is routine. We always had, reading books was always a part of the bedtime routine, and once that becomes a part of the routine, it's their body knows, like, oh, I'm going to start calming down. I'm going to start getting sleepy. And so the routine, kids, it's very important to kids. And bonding. Of course, you're spending very good, valuable time with your kids when you sit down and read a book. So read early and often. Yeah, that is why books are important. So if you do choose to become a writer, you know that you're contributing to something important, and you know that this is some of the reasons why you're writing that book. Or if you're a parent, then you know. All right. So now the question is, how do we attract children? How do we make them want to read a book? Right. My kids were I love books. Love books. I wish someone would pay me to read books. Like that could be a job, to just read books, right? And I guess I assumed that my kids were just going to naturally have that too. And they were a little bit resistant, having to sit still and read words, engage your brain. It's not always fun for all kids. But what could get their attention? And we're going to talk about that in this first part. Number one would be colors. Animals, kids love animals, different kinds of characters, a funny title, because right now we're talking about what's on the outside, right? Not what's on the inside. So, this is a colorful book. This, however, is not, right? But this has a title that they'd be like, it's the book with no pictures. And of course you'd be like, no pictures? What? Why is there? And it's a funny book inside. Okay, so these are some of the ways that we can attract, and I think if we go to the next slide, we can start talking about some specifics. All right, and some of these topics that we talk about are going to kind of overlap, because colors is also something that we would teach in a book as well, if that's something we were choosing for a topic. But there's lots of examples of colors and how we can get a kid's attention. So if you're planning on writing, that would be something you would take into consideration in the design and the illustrations in your book. And when dealing with little ones, a lot of times I found it was helpful to, okay, so we've got a book, and to make them interested, you would like, oh, look, there's a teddy bear. You know, do you have a teddy bear? Do you like teddy bears? Do you have a stuffed animal? Something to get them interested from the outside that makes them want to get into the inside. All right. Animals. I don't know about your kids, but my kids love animals. Animal sounds is one of the first things that they start doing. You know, you're teaching animal names and animal sounds because it's fun. In fact, my little one, he's 18 months old, this morning started going, neigh. When my daughter had a horse blanket, and he finally, it's his first animal sound. So we've reached a milestone here. But there's lots of books that use animals as the main characters. You know, you can take any human character and just replace it with an animal, and suddenly it's slightly more interesting to kids, right?
Sure.
Okay. Silly titles. That can get a kid's attention. If I saw a book called Never Lick a Llama, I would want to know why I shouldn't be licking that llama, right? Dragons love tacos. And hippopotamus, I actually have that book. And it's a really great, funny book that my kids love. And they're using the word, you know, the animal named hippopotamus and mushing it with hiccup. So this hippopotamus has hiccups. And they play with language in here, which is pretty funny for kids. And I can give you an example. There was a hippopotamus who hiccuped quite a lotamus. And every time he gotamus, he'd fall upon his bottomus. And so this ends up being a very fun book for kids. The Day My Crayons Quit. It's a funny book. I didn't know about it when I was little. It may be a fairly new book, but I've read it since, and it's a very good book. And then, Oh No, My Dinosaur Wants a Bath.
Oh.
Which you can imagine sounds like a messy situation. So a kid would be interested in finding out what happens. Okay? Now, what keeps children interested once they get into the book? All right? Which is kind of the meat of what we're talking about today. Simple images. And I'll have in the next slide or two, I'll have an example of some illustrations that your eyes aren't drawn to anything in particular. They're too busy. There's too much going on, and a kid doesn't even know what to look at, okay? Bright colors, of course. Language repetition, you know, like rhyming words or repeating words. And this has more purposes than just keeping them interested. It also will talk about it being on the right level later on, and repeating words helps keep it on a kid's level so that it's not overwhelming and just too many words that they don't know.
Like llama llama.
Like llama llama. Yep, exactly. And then you also got red pajama, which they're doing a rhyming thing too. And rhyming always makes things more.
And not in English, not only in English, it's in Russian.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In all languages, I think all languages tend to play with language, and you rhyme to. Yeah, exactly. I think I've seen in Uzbek on signs on trucks, and I'm like, that rhymes, and it probably is rhyming on purpose, not because the words just happen to rhyme. Like they made it rhyme on purpose. Let's see, rhythmic language. We know that. Here's my Dr. Seuss, right? Well, Dr. Seuss fairly universal. Green eggs and ham. It's very repetitive, but also very, very rhyming. Yeah. And he does it in iambic pentameter. Do y'all know that? In the same rhythm as like Shakespeare would do his sonnets and things. In iambic pentameter, it has a certain rhythm and flow to it. And he did that on purpose. Yeah. I considered doing that, and then I was like, that's a lot of work. I'm not going to rhyme like that. But it's a good way to keep a kid's attention. Humor, of course. Things that are silly and funny. My kids absolutely love the book with no pictures. You would think a kid, pictures are 90% of the fun of reading a book, right? But this book with no pictures is, it's funny. So this is a book with no pictures. It might seem like no fun to have someone read you a book with no pictures. It probably seems boring and serious. Except, here's how books work. Everything the words say, the person reading the book has to say, no matter what. That's the deal. That's the rule. So that means even if the words say blork, which is not a word. Wait, what? That doesn't mean anything. Blurf. Wait a second. What? So the whole thing is full of silly words. And also, the kid I'm reading this book to is the best kid ever in the history of the entire world. So instead of having pictures, the words are entertaining. They're fun. Interactive elements. We've got several here as well. I thought this was the cutest book. In the shape of a fox, right? And it's called Little Fox. So there are ways to make it interactive. Got several examples, and we will kind of get to the end of that. But I think one of the big things that keeps children interested is the appropriate length and not being too wordy. Okay? So let's go ahead and start talking about these specifically. All right, staying focused. Some kids have better attention spans than others. All right, but still, even on the best of days, kids have shorter attention spans than adults, right? A child's maximum attention span is about 2 or 3 times their age. So your 5-year-old will be able to sit still and pay attention for a maximum of 15 minutes. Okay? And some even that's not very realistic, You seem like you have a question. You're like,
Yeah, it's really short of time.
It is. So
How can we, I just wondered, how can we achieve our goal in 50 minutes?
Well, I guess that depends on what your goal is. Because even if we read, for instance, I read this book, Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, which deals with the ABCs, with the alphabet. At the end of this book, do I expect them to be able to be like A, B, C, D, E, F, G? I'm not, right? It's going to take lots of repetition for my kid to get the alphabet. So my goal is, number 1, bonding. Number 2, language and emotion expression. And number 3, to be just a part of that repetition. Because maybe some other time during the day I might be doing flashcards or it's snack time and you're going to have an apple. Apple, A, or apple. However, you're going to reinforce an alphabet. But this isn't, 15 minutes is enough to accomplish those goals, knowing that this isn't the end all be all final time that we discuss this. And your kids are going to have like favorite books that you're going to have to read 100 million times over and over anyway. So, you'll have lots of opportunities. Okay, so we've got a time goal here, time restriction. So whether you're a parent or a writer, you have to or a teacher too, managing a classroom, you have to understand that 15 minutes is
short time.
It's not that long. But also, can a kid sit there for 15 minutes and only listen to you? Blah, 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 blah. Number 1, monotone is not going to keep their attention, right? You're going to have to, put on your dramatics a little bit, right? Funny voices. But also in between, you know, especially a book, this doesn't have like a solid, you know, like it's not big paragraphs. But in something that has a paragraph, you're going to want to stop. And if there's a rhyming word, then I would stop and repeat those words to bring their attention to it. Or alliteration, when words start with the same sound, I would always repeat that and say, look, alliteration, it starts with the same sound, even when they were two, you know. Or pointing out pictures. Where's the apple? Do you see an apple? I see an apple. Because that 15 minutes is not necessarily a solid chunk that they are literally focusing for 15 minutes. There's got to be a little bit of variation of what's going on, okay? Length and wordiness. Now, if you see at the bottom, there's a word that says stamina, okay? Just a couple of days ago, there was a marathon here in Tashkent, right? Now, running, marathon, okay? Now, do you think the people who went out and ran in that marathon just woke up that morning having not gone to the gym in the last 5 years or, you know, exercised in the last 5 years? I'm like, you know what? I feel like running a marathon today. Right? Not that didn't happen, okay? Because you have to build up stamina, right? You have to work up to that. So maybe today you can only run a mile without dying, but tomorrow or next week, maybe you can run 1.5 miles without dying, okay? And you work up. What we don't realize sometimes is that reading actually is the same way. A little kid, you can't hand a little kid, I had a chapter book, but you can't hand your new reader, you know, your 7-year-old who can read now, you know, but you can't hand them a chapter book that's 150 pages long and say, here, go read for 30 minutes.
It's a process.
It's a process because 5 minutes later, your 7-year-old is going to be hanging off the couch going, because you have to build up to it. So maybe they read a paragraph and you read a paragraph, okay? But also your little ones too. This is going to be you have to build stamina and keep that in mind, okay? Now, appropriate length and wordiness based off of, it's a combination of age as well as reading capability, not to mention a little attention span in there too, okay? Picture books, early readers, chapter books, upper middle grades. They all have kind of a recommendation. And understand that 500 words for the baby to 6 years old, 500 words does not mean 500 new words. There's a lot of repetition in there. I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not like them Sam I am, right? There's a lot of Sam I am going on in that book because a kid can't handle, no one can. If I'm learning Uzbek, I can't read a book with 500 new words in there, okay? So, and I've got a slide later on that will help us understand reading level a little bit more based off of that word count thing. But just keep that in mind if you are planning on writing a book, or as a parent, understanding that if I'm going to pull out an early reader, but for my baby, maybe, or vice versa, realize that maybe I should read a paragraph and they should read a paragraph, or I need to break it up a little bit or something like that, okay, to make it more appropriate for their level. So minimalistic art. And the cover doesn't necessarily have to be. This is one style, okay? You can see these covers are very minimalistic. But that's not saying that, I don't know, that this isn't okay. This is slightly busier. But what we want to not happen is we don't want to overwhelm their senses, okay? And we want to help them know what to focus on. So if you go to the next slide, there's an example. Now, this is you know, a Where's Waldo, okay? You don't know where to look in that picture. But also, this one isn't a Where's Waldo, and I still am not sure who is the focus of that picture, right? By looking at that picture, I couldn't tell you who the story is going to be about. And a little kid would be even less discerning than I am, probably, right? Than we are. So we want to make sure that it's eye-catching, there's an obvious focal point, and we don't have to fill up every page completely with images everywhere, right? Just because a little bit is good does not mean a lot is better, right? We all know that. Okay. Rhyming, rhythm, and language repetition. I don't know, we learn our ABCs through a song, right?
Yes, I know.
I think a lot of people, a lot of languages probably have a song that helps teach several things, right?
Yeah.
Because rhythm helps us remember something. I can remember if it's in a song, like song lyrics, you can probably think of a song right now and you know the lyrics, even though you've never actually seen them written down, probably. Because rhythm does that. So in teaching, using rhythm is important. It's fun on top of that. And repetition, again, also is fun. Well, repetition and rhyme contribute to the rhythm of a book. Those are some of the keys and clues that tell you what the rhythm is. So that little excerpt is from a Dr. Seuss book. And, you know, Dr. Seuss is kind of the master of rhyme and repetition, probably, right? Okay, let's go to the humor. Everyone loves to laugh, right? And it's good medicine to laugh as well. It's good for you. There's a book called The Worst Book Ever. And it makes me want to read it. I've never read it before. I want to know what it's about. Let's see. If you laugh, I'm starting this book over. All right. And then the worst alphabet book ever. P is for pterodactyl. Because I'm sure, as all of you guys are familiar with English, you know there's lots of grammar rules, right? And then there's always something that breaks that rule, right? Yeah, all sorts of exceptions. So this is a book that doesn't play by the rules, and so that makes it fun and interesting for kids and adults too, because I think that would be entertaining as well. Interactive stories. Kids are busy, right? They don't like to sit still. So there are interactive books. They're a way to make a book interactive. We've got some examples. This is a counting book, and it's got stars in it. And as you flip the page, and of course it rhymes, it's got numbers, okay? And then as you flip the page, a star disappears, and it's counting down with the stars. And so with every single page, we would count together. 1, 2, 3. And it breaks up the monotony, right, of sitting still. Can't remember if we've got, you want to flip the screen, let me see. Now these are really cute. I actually hadn't seen these books before. But finger puppets. Go ahead. There's also touch and feel.
Yeah.
We have lots of those. Because number one, that's actually sensory related. You're teaching your kids, even babies, you know, having the difference in the texture. Their brains go, wait a second. They can't use language yet, but their brains are kind of saying, wait a second, that's different than the other one. And it's exercising those brains. Okay. Pop-ups. We do have a pop-up book over here somewhere that I covered up. But you know, you can lift a flap, or as you pop up, once again, that's going to keep a kid's attention for sure. And then the lift the flap to find an answer or a word or something. Yeah, the flaps never make it that long, you know, but for the one kid that gets to use them intact, it's very interesting. Okay. All right. Noises and sounds. You push a button and there's animal sounds, or it says a word out loud. And that's an interactive way to keep a kid's attention, as well as, I think, probably 100% of the time it's teaching something. It's not just a random sound, you know. Okay. Now, if we're writing a book, what teaches children? Okay. So we use books to teach a lot of the basics when it comes to our toddlers and early learners, right? Whether it's the alphabet or colors or
Animals.
this one, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, it teaches, let's see,
It's a very popular one.
it is a very popular one. I believe it teaches the days of the week, right?
Mhm.
It teaches counting. It teaches fruit, and not just fruit, but other foods as well, right? All in this one book, not to mention the caterpillar turning into a butterfly, right?
Yeah.
Going into a cocoon and turning into a very beautiful butterfly. And kids do love it because, number one, I think they like to hear how the one caterpillar ate a cake, of ice cream, a pickle, cheese,
Yeah.
sausage, a lollipop, a piece of pie, a hot dog, a muffin, and a piece of watermelon, right? It's funny, but it's also teaching them all those other things as well. So one book can be multi-purpose, okay? Trying to think of what else. But we can also teach values, right? Morals and ethics and values that our culture finds important. I'm trying to think of what here's one, brave as can be. And it's a
Moral.
brave as can be. So it talks about a kid who is scared of the dark, I think, and about how they kind of deal with that until finally they're a little bit bigger and they're less afraid. They realize that the scary things they think might be in the dark are not actually so big and scary after all, right? What else? Oh, the Places You Will Go by Dr. Seuss as well. And actually, my husband received this book when he graduated from high school. Their principal gave this to all of them, despite it being way below their reading level. But it talks about, it says, congratulations, today is your day. You're off to great places. You're off and away. You have brains in your head. You have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. So it's about being successful, having a goal and heading that direction. So these are all ways that we teach values and ideas to our kids, whether it's the fables that teach you not to lie or to respect your parents, or moral stories. Or the Three Little Pigs. Like that has a moral to the story, right? That's teaching our kids something for a purpose, not just a fun story.
Working hard.
Or listen to your mother when she tells you not to make it out of sticks. But yeah, it teaches a lesson. And there's lots and lots of fun ways that we can do that. This is one that's a specific kind of line it's called thanks for the feedback. And it means when somebody tells you something, maybe they didn't like what you did, how to take that and say, okay, thanks for the feedback, instead of getting your feelings hurt or getting defensive or upset and angry. And how many lessons do we have to teach our kids before they turn 18? Okay, we have a lot, right? So a lot of those can be done through books. All right, so there's lots of things we can teach children through books. Let's go ahead and explore some of these. Counting, of course. We looked at some of those. Dr. Seuss also has a 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish. It's really wordy, and my kids never like to sit still for it, so we had to get creative in how we went through the book. But go ahead. Morals and values. Different is good. You matter. Kindness rules. all sorts of topics that you can choose to take. You know, am I going to have animals or people as my characters? What is my purpose in writing this book? Do I want to teach them a moral or a value? Do I want to teach them something educational? And then am I going to do it through rhyme and rhythm and repetition? Am I going to do it through a funny story? Am I going to do something more realistic? There's lots of options you have to reach that final goal, right? Okay. Leveled readers. This is another thing that I found really, really helpful in teaching our kids to read, because learning to read is a process, right? First, we start off learning the alphabet. Then we have to learn what sound is associated with that letter. And some languages are more upfront and easy to figure out, but English of course, is constantly throwing a wrench in things, right? And that things change, you know?
But
So there's a lot of that. Yes, ma'am?
yeah, I mean, when it's very small one, it's just so easy to teach him. Everything.
Not reading.
Yeah, no,
Not reading.
yeah.
You can
I mean,
just teach
it's a process.
speaking.
So so you can think about leveled readers. For instance, this book is called Hop, and it starts with 3-letter words that are very simple and straightforward in their pronunciation, right?
It can be used.
Sam can hop.
Mm-hmm.
Simple. And this is great to use in classrooms as well. We use them at home, and I know my kids in the earlier grades, they use them in classrooms as well. And they advance in their level. And you can see I've included a chart that kind of shows which level reader goes with which age and stuff. Now, there's also these I can read. I'm sure some of you have maybe heard of this. There's levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm not sure if it goes higher than that. But the language gets progressively more difficult. But it's meant for the kids to move up from level 1 that leads them into level 2 and on up. And what they do a lot of times is they can take a more complicated story and you just simplify it down so that they can read. For example, I actually have, and this is, a little more advanced than this, but I actually have Shakespeare right here, Macbeth. Can my 5-year-old read Shakespeare? No.
Not even me.
No. It's my language and I still don't understand. No, it's a complicated language. It's Old English and it's difficult to understand anyways, but it's also long and laborious, right? So this takes the long, complicated story and condenses it down into something more attainable for lower level readers. Same thing with Little Women. Little Women is a fat little book, right?
Yeah.
But this is not so bad, okay? So we can take a big, complicated story and change the level so that it's appropriate for other readers and learners, okay? There's lots and lots and lots of possibilities out there. There's also...
My daughter's favorite this one.
It was my daughter's too. I think they were doing it in school, and she just loved them. Of course, she could only do like one at a time, and she loved them so much. It's Elephant and Piggy. Yeah, Elephant, Gerald, and Piggy. And the language is short, right? It's attainable for young readers. This was when she was in like kindergarten.
Yeah.
And then maybe a little bit into 1st grade. And slow as she made it through, we started with the little stuff, and then she graduated onto this. And then from now, she's reading, regular books, although, only for about 15 minutes at a time because she has very short attention span. So there's leveled books, leveled readers are an important part of teaching a kid to read. So it is something if somebody was interested in taking on such a task, to be able to write leveled readers in Uzbek or something to contribute to the market, that would be a very valuable piece. Mm-hmm. All right. So back to that reader's level, and in order to understand what is appropriate for a kid, okay? So like the way an educator would figure out if this book is appropriate for this student, it's called a Lexile score. But basically what it is you have the student read a page, right, in the book, one page. If they have, like, they run into one or two words that they don't know, then that book is too easy.
Yeah.
They need to move up to the next level. Yeah. If they run into 2 to 3 words that they don't know, then that's good. Okay? This is the reason why I said I can't read an Uzbek book and it be my appropriate level, because I'm going to run into a lot of new words, right, for a real book. That's why how many in a book that has, you know, this page has 4 words, they're going to run into maybe one that they're not familiar with, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to keep this in mind, especially when we're having our children read. If they're running into a word or two every sentence that's new for them, that they're having to ask, what does this mean? What does this mean? Mm-hmm. They're not going to be able to retain that much. Okay? If they run into 2 words, 3 words on the whole page, those words they could probably remember because it's not too much. So we have to make sure we're aware of how many, you know, their level and the level of the book, and make sure they're appropriately matched up. Okay? So for those of you who are interested in writing, like, how do you get started? There's a world of possibilities out there. It's a lot to start. It's a big project to be thinking about. So I think one of the first things you have to do is figure out your audience, right? What is your target audience? How old? What level of reader? Or is it a book that a parent's going to read a kid, not necessarily a kid be reading on their own? And that will tell you what kind of language you're going to use, how long it's going to be, how difficult are the words going to be, and then what's the purpose of the book? Are you teaching a value? Are you teaching something educational? Is it more inspirational? Okay, here's maybe a story about the endless potential in all of us. Okay, is it going to be a warm, fuzzy, feel-good book, right? And then how are you going to use the language? Rhyming, repetition, rhythm, funny. Your, and then start thinking about your fonts, your colors, your illustrations, and how that's going to contribute to the full package of that book and a kid's interest and entertainment and all that. And then, of course, the title. There can be a lot done with the title, because this title maybe makes me want to figure out what's in this. Maybe what?
Curious.
You know?
Yeah, curious.
Exactly.
Attractive.
Curious. We never outgrow that curiosity, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. And now, you know, there's definitely more to this process, but in getting started, these are the first things that you need to think about in order to point yourself in the right direction and it not be so overwhelming. You know, you can kind of narrow your focus on what you're going to be doing. Or as a parent, you can take all these things into consideration as well when picking out a book for your kid or for your students in your classes. Do we have any questions?
We have online questions.
We have online questions. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Question.
From Pete Daggett.
12 years old. Okay. So this says, can you share with us your favorite American books for children around 12 years old? I could say, to be honest, and this is actually one of my favorite sets of books, if I could locate that book. I know I have one right over here. This was actually a turning point at my house when it came to reading, because this was a turning point. My kids, you know, up until that point, they wanted me to do all the reading, right? And they weren't real. They were like, meh, about reading. Mm-hmm. And This is called Magic Treehouse. And there's a lot of them.
Series.
It's a big series, okay? And it's two kids, a little sister and a big brother, who accidentally come upon a magic treehouse, or a treehouse. They didn't know it was magic yet. In the woods, in the forest by their house. And there was a book in there, and they picked up the book, and when they opened it, it took them to where that book was, like what it was about, okay? So it's not nonfiction, it's fiction, right? It's not a true story. But at the same time that there's this imagination element to it,
I'm not sure I understand.
It's also teaching something that's for real, right? So this one is Ghost Town at Sundown. And this takes them back in U.S. history to the Wild, Wild West, right? So there's some that take them back to, it was like pandas or something. So it takes them to China. Or there was one that took them to, what was the name of the Mount Vesuvius, like the volcano that erupted long time ago and took out like an entire island or civilization, entire town, you know? Pompeii. There we go. Sorry. There's all sorts of places that these books take them. Some were to like maybe the Revolutionary War, you know, like they're suddenly with George Washington, you know, on the battlefield, or there's tons of different ones. And they found it interesting because of the imagination and the fun interactions, but they were also learning something something real in the world, in the U.S. that was relevant and important to learn. So in our reading, at first I was reading these, and then I would be like, oh, hey, Avery, you wanna read a paragraph, you know? And then it started to where I would go to like, okay, it's time for me to go read to them. And then I'd peek in and they were already reading it to each other. And then they started taking turns. And then suddenly all they want to do is read. And my mom heart was very happy because they fell in love with reading. And that's this set of books that started that. And of course it would depend on what level your 12-year-old reader is on. My kids, I have a 12-year-old actually, and she's really into graphic novels, you know, which come with, you know.
My 12-year son actually adores reading. The first book he read was Wimpy Kid's Diary because he had already watched the film and it was amazing. It gave a lot of information, I think, and
it's funny too, right?
And funny,
it's funny.
And my daughters love Charlotte's Web.
Yep.
And another one is Edward Tilley. And I read, so it's our family's favorite. These two books are favorite ones.
Okay, so there's tons of books out there. Trying to think of what else my 12-year-old. I've even started buying graphic novel, like oh gosh, for real, like literature, you know, like the Odyssey, but they have it in a graphic novel. So my 11-year-old has read the Iliad and the Odyssey and loved it.
As a teen, we read Mark Twain, Tom Sawyer,
that's a pretty big book, right? And I think I also got them the graphic novel.
It was back in Russian, not in English, of course.
Yeah.
But I found it very interesting, and it gave a lot of impression. And I still remember how it was entertaining. Yeah.
So, got another one?
Online question.
Okay. What makes a good children's book? So, once again, that depends on the audience you're going for and what your purpose in writing the book is. So, you have to decide, are you trying to entertain or are you trying to teach? You know, and those are going to look slightly different perhaps, but they both have an important place in children's literature. And I think as long as it's within the correct reading level, because if a new reader, an 8-year-old, opens the book and it's just a page of words and a page of words, and that's overwhelming, and they're not gonna be able to stick with it. They're not gonna fall in love with reading. because it's just too much. For instance, you hand me calculus. I'm not going to fall in love with math if you start me out on calculus. Okay? I need something simple. Okay? Any questions
Yeah,
here?
yeah, sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I wonder how can we teach our little kids? I have a 4-year-old daughter who speaks fluent English and knows everything, and he learns everything from YouTube. She thinks YouTube is AI and it's a good teacher.
Mhm.
Tutor, but the difficult situation is how to teach little kids music knowledge by books, because it's just not very easy to learn from books. Not
Yeah, teaching music through
so,
books
do you
is.
know any good books which can teach a little kids music knowledge?
I really don't, because music is more about doing,
Yeah.
and or either you're listening to appreciate and to improve your ear, or you're doing
Yeah,
when it
but,
comes to music.
some compositions they have to do at early ages, not just remembering. They have to read the composition. I mean,
So
books. Yeah,
I mean,
it's
if you
so-
wanted to, you could start with but I think still there needs to be hands-on, like see and where that belongs in the, on the bar scale for music. You could do, flashcards, and they would be able to identify. But once again, it also depends on the instrument and the clef that you're dealing with. So that's doing is really the best way. A xylophone or a little flutophone is usually how they start out.
a guitar
And matching, well, but that's more complicated. Xylophone and a flutophone keep it simple. Once again, the calculus versus basic math. It keeps it simple, and they can learn to identify where the notes go on the scale. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So thank you very much for presentation. I found that very useful. My question is, while following here, I noticed two different jobs, profession, like author and illustrator.
Yes,
Oh,
ma'am.
yeah.
And it's a bit, I'm a bit confused. If I decided to write something, does it mean I should know how to design all this stuff?
No, I mean,
something
you
like
could
that?
have a vision for what you want. I'm not an artist at all. Some people are writers, some people are artists. There's very few that get to do both,
Yeah.
But I think as a writer, you have a vision for what you kind of think you want, and then you give that task to someone else who actually,
Professional.
a professional, depending on what look you're going for. I've seen books where they actually had their kid illustrate it with little kid pictures, because a little kid's going to be reading it, is going to be the audience, so those little kid representations of things are completely appropriate. But yes, a professional. And there's actually websites that it's like, there's some websites where you can post your little, like, I need this illustrated out there, and then different artists will contact you and say, here's an example of my drawings, and you can choose to. My husband has published a kid's book, and that's what he did, is he got on one of those websites and hired somebody across the world.
So it's no problem.
It's not difficult. Yeah.
And there are some communities in Facebook. So some authors, they search for illustrators, and some illustrators search for authors.
Mm-hmm.
You can join them and
Yeah.
find, and
Yeah.
It's now a good opportunity to use artificial intelligence, for example,
Yeah,
Midjourney,
that's-
and it will be
that's
very
what-
interesting for children also.
Yeah.
When you say these illustrations created by artificial.
Mhm. It's also a good chance to find a teenage artist
Yes.
in your community and give them a chance to
Yeah.
do something like this, and kind of, that would kind of inspire them to focus even more on their art and help them realize that there is,
Or even
There
we
is-
can make our own books with children. So,
Mhm.
we can do it during the classes or at home with our family. So a lot of ideas, and we can design. If it's
Yeah.
possible, we can publish it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other?
Those who completely hate how can they get satisfied? Except fiction.
Yeah. Okay, so number one is making sure that it's appropriate for your reading level. And number two, taking into consideration your stamina. Have reasonable expectations of where you are as a reader, okay? But then it really comes down to picking the book. Because if you don't really find reading fun, you could probably hand me any book and there's a 95% chance I'm just going to enjoy it because I enjoy reading. But that's not the case for everyone, and that's okay. What you want to do if you don't find reading fun, but you want to read, you know that it's a good thing, it's pick a book that's talking about something you care about. That's the best way to do it. Same thing with your kid. If you have a reluctant reader, one of your kids is a reluctant reader, it's all about the topic. And if they love ninjas, find a ninja book, okay? You got to find something that they want to hear about, they want to learn about, that they're interested in. You got a kid who loves dinosaurs. That's what you got to do until they fall in love with it, and then you can go somewhere else. Or if they never do fall in love with it, they're just going to read a lot of dinosaur books, you know?
So we have talked a lot about paper books, yeah? So what about the e-books? So listening or audiobooks? So
What about, well, this is
What
specifically
is it?
about children's literature.
yeah.
And they aren't to a point where I think they can handle listening to a book without the visual stimulation as well. Because even as an adult, I'm one of those people who cannot do audiobooks because my brain wanders.
Oh.
Anything could catch my
Yeah.
attention, and
Yeah.
suddenly I've missed 8 minutes of the book and I don't know what just happened.
Yeah.
So that, I don't think that's
It's very, very popular at the moment.
it makes it easy to multitask, to do more than one thing at a time. Right, yeah. For some people, it just doesn't work for me, and it wouldn't work for a kid.
Yeah.
Sardor.
How to switch fiction books to scientific books? For example, my son is 13 years old, and I want to give them some psychology or some history books. It's
Mhm.
not fiction books. So how to switch? He loves the read, but
Yeah.
these scientific books for him is so boring. So
Yeah.
how to switch?
So I think there's a lot of people who have done a really good job at this. For one of these
Oh, yeah.
being an example, but there's lots of others. I even have some graphic novels that deal with U.S. history.
Mm-hmm.
Or I got one of my kids who's interested in like science, medical kind of stuff. We have a book on viruses and like cells and viruses and stuff, and it's a graphic novel. But she was telling me all sorts of words and things that I don't know what she's talking about. But she learned through this book that made it a little more interesting. We've got books on sharks, books on like what's large cats. My sister loves sharks, so she always gives my kids books on sharks, you know. And we've got some like large cat books, and so there's a big picture, and then there's information.
Mm-hmm.
Because you still, when you're dealing with scientific books, like you can't hand your 13-year-old psychology 101 and be like, learn, you know, it's once again above their reading level. So we would have to figure out a way to take maybe one of those psychology theories, put it into a social situation,
Mm-hmm.
they would be able to read this book about this social situation that in the end would teach them about this psychology theory in order to bring it down to a kid's level. Right.
I'm thinking it's one day it's coming for himself. You know why? Because when I was small one, I'll try to read book because it's at school. Have every day to read book. I'm not read. I sure say when it's we have this time. It's all the time. I just only say I'm not read, but I know this is situation. It's like this coming, but. After maybe 20 years old, yeah, because when I start to read book, it's coming 25 years old. I start to read, something.
It's a process, and it looks different for all of us.
Like you know, I can just only take shower and read book.
We have to be patient
not
with our
read
kids
book.
and our students because Like, once again, I thought it was going to look the same as for me. I was a little kid supposed to be in bed, and I had a nightlight plugged in the wall, and I'm up against the wall. My parents don't know I'm still awake, and I'm reading with the nightlight because I can't stand to put my book down. It doesn't look like that for everybody, and that's okay. You had a question.
Yeah, I have a question. For 2 years, I've been running my online English ebook club. I really love children's literature because I have 2 daughters who are reading this. And I also motivate all others. And we read a book once, one book, and we discuss it. So, as a motivator, where I can find more sources in American and British, about more popular literature.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to do some searching for ebooks because there are websites out there that have ebooks. Or we're talking about free books, right? That people don't have to pay for.
Audio, so
yeah,
PDF and
that's difficult, especially ones that actually have permission to print them. That it's not pirated, and you're taking away from the profits of the actual author and illustrator. I mean, honestly, that would just be a elbow deep Google search trying to figure out what's out there. And I have seen some Telegram channels here in Uzbekistan that tend to put out some PDFs and stuff now and again. Trying to find. Not here. I work at the embassy here. I'm on the education team. I was a teacher in America. So I don't know. I'm sure I didn't give you much information because that's just it's a complicated question that things aren't out there for free as much as we would like them to be.
It's still better than nothing, I think. You can use it, plus you can listen.
Well, and when you're doing a book club, and then I think there's some libraries out there who have digital books, but I don't know if it costs a subscription to this library or if you just have to have a library card and you're able to borrow from, because there's a reading group here at the embassy with some of us adults, and they try to pick a book. Our next book they always try to make it one that people can find for free and borrow from an online library somewhere. So I don't know, honestly. I'm a fan of Kindle. I have Kindle books, And yes, ma'am.
For example, nowadays children like reading books. But how we attract the children?
Yeah, I mean that is the challenge. The more technologically centered our culture gets, the more difficult it is to get a kid to get off of YouTube, like you were saying, and have something in their hand. And as a parent, that's part of our job is to teach moderation and to tell them when it's time to, like, yes, this is fun, and yes, there's so much we can learn right on YouTube. There's tons, learning other languages,
almost everything.
Yeah, I think I had read that it had become replaced Google almost as the place where people search for information. Instead of going to Google to read about it, they go to YouTube and Google in YouTube to watch a video about it, so I mean it's constant. We're constantly trying to pull our kids back to having an appreciation for the written word, and it's going to be a constant struggle. And one of those things is keeping it interesting, keeping it fun, and keeping it entertaining, and and parents going, no more, done.
Parents,
you had your 30 minutes.
Children are interested in reading. If you read your kids,
it's the role modeling.
It probably is. My parents, my mother loved to read. My dad, we used to tease him that he never even finished Green Eggs and Ham because he just didn't care about reading. I remember me sitting on the couch and reading, and my dad would be like, can you do something constructive? I'm like, I'm reading a book. That's a good thing. But all 4 of me and my siblings, we all love to read, and it's probably because of my mom and not my dad. So,
Whenever my kids come and I said, okay, you read this book, we all read it. And whenever I say, wash the dishes, they say, no, I'm going to read it.
I hope my kids don't figure that out. All right,
in this case, we have to listen.
Yeah.
We can listen.
Okay, so I'm really grateful that you guys came to listen, and I'm grateful for your interest in children's literature, and I do hope to see, lots of great books out there from you guys, and I hope your kids also benefit from what we've talked about today.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.